But first, here's my take. Later this year, the Obama administration will have to make a decision on whether to greenlight the Keystone pipeline. That's the 2,000-mile pipeline that would bring oil from the tar sands of Canada to the Gulf of Mexico. I'm sure you've heard all the dire warnings about it. But another way to think about this is to ask, what would happen if the pipeline did not go forward? The Department of State released an extremely thorough report that tries to answer just this question. And it concludes basically that the oil from these tar sands would be developed at about the same pace whether there was a pipeline or not. In other words, stopping Keystone might make us feel good, but it really won't do anything about climate change. Why? Well, given the demand for oil in the United States, Canada's producers would still get Alberta's oil to the refineries in the Gulf of Mexico. There are other pipeline possibilities, but the most likely method is by train. The report estimates that it would take daily runs of 15 trains with about 100 tanker cars each to carry the amount planned by TransCanada, the company. That's a large increase, but one likely to be met. The increases in oil transported by rail in the United States are already staggering. Carloads of crude oil on trains doubled between 2010 and 2011. Then they tripled between 2011 and 2012. And remember, research shows that moving oil by train produces much higher emissions of carbon dioxide than were the oil to flow through a pipeline. Canada could also transport the oil to Asia, where demand is booming. Right now, that seems a distant and costly prospect, but having visited Alberta recently, I can attest that Canadian businessmen and officials are seriously planning for Asian markets, especially since they now regard American policy as politicized, hostile, and mercurial. Also, if we don't use the oil from Alberta, we need to get the oil from somewhere else: Venezuela, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, or California. Some of these oils are heavy crude, and processing, refining, and burning them is even more harmful to the environment than burning Canadian oil sands. To the extent that it makes us use more coal for electricity generation, that's a big step backwards for the environment. For many of these reasons, the scientific journal Nature, which has long been a leader on climate change, argued in an editorial that Obama should approve the Keystone project. Many environmental groups are taking an approach towards this project that resembles the way the United States government fights the war on drugs. They attack supply rather than demand. In this case, environmentalists have chosen one particular supply of energy, Alberta's tar sands, and are trying to shut it down. But as long as there is demand for oil, there will be supply. The far more effective solution would be to try to moderate demand by putting in place a carbon tax or a cap-and-trade system. Ideally, we would use the proceeds from these taxes to fund research on alternative energy, which we badly need to do. Opponents of Keystone say the facts are less important in this case. It is the symbolism that matters. We have to stop this big project. Symbolism does matter. If we were to block this project, one that is no worse than many other sources of energy, one that rebuffs our closest trading partner and ally, that spurns easily accessible energy in favor of Venezuelan or Saudi crude oil, it would be a symbol, a terrible symbol. It would be a symbol that emotion had taken the place of analysis, and that ideology now trumps science on both sides of the environmental debate. For more on this, go to cnn.com/Fareed for a link to my Time column this week. Let's get started. Well, you've heard my views on the Keystone Pipeline. Let's hear the other side now. Michael Brune is the executive director of one of America's oldest and biggest grassroots environmental groups, the Sierra Club. He joins us from San Francisco. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, Fareed. Thanks for having me on.
So tell me why I'm wrong.
Well, look, what you're saying sounds very reasonable, but we need to meet the challenge of climate change with all of the ambition and inspiration that we have to offer. What we know is that tar sands oil is dirtier than conventional oil. What we also know is that we shouldn't be spending $7 billion on a dirty and dangerous pipeline when we know that clean energy will do a better job.
if you were to look around the world, is this the worst form of energy we are using? No, it's dirty coal plants for sure. And I know you've done very good work on that, and I totally support you and the Sierra Club on it. But what I'm struck by is, why are you singling out this one when, you know, at the end of the day, the greenhouse gas emissions profile is not going to be that different, given that we continue to consume this stuff? Why not try to do something about that consumption issue?
Well, I appreciate the point. And, you know, the work that we're doing on coal actually relates very closely to this. Over the last 3 years, more than 140 U.S. coal plants have been announced for retirement. A lot of them will be replaced by clean energy, and it's enabling the U.S. to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions to a point that we were at 20 years ago. The tar sands, the overall tar sands development threatens to undermine all of that progress.
How?
Now,
wait, I gotta stop you. I gotta stop you. First of all, most of those coal-fired power plants, the electricity they're generating is being replaced by natural gas. It's being replaced by natural gas that is being gotten through fracking. So when you look at volumes, you're still, you know, renewables, by which you mean solar and wind, it's under 5%. Most of what we're talking about is the replacement of coal is natural gas. So it seems to me there, maybe I'm wrong, but you're making a sensible trade-off that, look, at the end of the day, with all its problems, natural gas is cleaner than coal, correct?
Sure. We'll get back to Keystone in a second, but what's happening in the electricity market right now is that solar and wind, the costs are dropping extremely fast. The cost of solar has dropped by 80% in the last 5 years. So what you're seeing now is that solar, this is nuts, but is actually starting to beat out gas in California on cost alone. Wind is starting to beat out coal in the Great Plains states on cost alone. So
because of large subsidies in both cases. The solar, the California situation.
For every form of, there are subsidies for every form of energy, for coal, for gas, for solar, for wind, for nukes. What we're seeing, though, in 2012, for all of the new capacity that came online, more new capacity in solar and wind came online than coal and gas and nuclear power combined. We joined together to push the Obama administration to enact the car standards announced last fall. Those car standards will save 3 million barrels of oil every day, which is almost 4 times the amount of oil that would come through this Keystone XL pipeline. So in the context of all of this, when we have the dirtiest, most carbon-intensive fuel source on the planet in Canada, we don't need this oil. We don't need to be bringing it down from Canada.
Again, do you dispute that coal is worse for climate change? I mean, you keep saying it's the dirtiest, but coal is worse. And yet we get most of our electricity. Fuel sources. Okay. But let me ask you about those sands in California, in Canada, because look. This is Canada's, these are Canada's oil reserves. 98% of Canada's oil reserves are in Alberta. 99% of those oil reserves are in tar sands. The Canadians are going to produce this stuff. It is going to get to market. It is going to get to people who want it, whether it's in Asia, whether it's in China, whether it's in the Gulf of Mexico. It will be burned. And as I say, the market is telling you by looking at the boom in railroads, by the fact that Warren Buffett is buying this stuff. The State Department report concludes basically that these oil sands would be developed at about the same pace, looking at precisely this market data. So I would argue you're arguing against Warren Buffett, you're arguing against the State Department, and you're arguing against the history of capitalism, that when there is demand, when there's so much demand for a product, supply finds its way. I mean, look at the drug wars, as I said, right? You keep trying to stop supply, but when you have insatiable demand, it finds its way.
Sure. Look, I'm very well aware, Fareed, of the large list of people who feel differently about this. But what is also true is that there are a lot of business people who feel that this is a boondoggle and this is a bad investment in America, and it's a bad investment when it comes to our climate. But at the end of the day, Fareed, what we're saying is that we do know how to build pipelines, we do know how to build refineries and coal plants. We can't continue the same pattern of development over the next century that we've had over the last century. Last year we had record droughts and record wildfires and record storms. Our temperature increase was a full degree Fahrenheit over the previous record. All of that was in 1 year. with barely more than a degree of warming. We're about to see almost 4 degrees of warming. We're about to see that. That's almost locked in. So we have to do something different. So I realize that trying to stop the tar sands development is hard to do. It's particularly hard to do when you have the U.S. government, the Canadian government, and the oil industry all aligned to try to expand development. But what we're saying is that we can't do it. What we're also proposing is that clean energy, which is cheaper, which will put more people to work, which won't threaten our air and water, won't destabilize our atmosphere, is ready to do the job. It's ready to take up a much larger proportion of our energy demand in the United States. We're ready for a clean energy transition, but that transition will be delayed, it'll be suppressed the more money we sink into these new, big fossil fuel projects.
All right, we will have to leave it at that. Michael Brune, you're very kind to come on, and you're very civil in your disagreement. I really appreciate that, and as I said, I admire the Sierra Club for many of the things it does. Thanks for joining us.